We're live. All right. Uh, we're back again with another episode of the Operator View webcast. I'm your host, Nick Swink. And today we have the first ever guest. It is Steve Guris, Threat Intelligence Lead at Risk 360. Steve, welcome to the webcast.
Nick, happy to be here. Thank you for asking about the last name because you got it dead on.
Great. Yeah, I was gonna go with the other G pronunciation, but I'm glad I clarified that. Guris.
I've heard all kinds of crazy ones over the years.
Yeah, I'm sure. So for this episode today, we're going to dive into some of Steve's most recent research into the game hacking, game cheating threat landscape. He dug into what I would say is a high-end cheat service and kind of picked it apart, figured out how it works, and came away with some really interesting findings. So I have some slides that we'll throw up, and they're kind of just in the background as we talk through some of this stuff. But today it's all about this most recent research of Steve and Destiny ML, as it was called. Steve, what is Destiny ML?
So Destiny ML is the Destiny 2 specific product from Game ML, which is the cheat developer themselves. So all of their products are branded as ML for machine learning. They've got like 18 different games offered. Destiny is one of them. I personally have a long public history of background with working with Bungie. I was an expert witness for them in the Aim Junkies trial a couple of years ago. So, of course, I'm going to dive into a Destiny cheat. I may not have Destiny installed anymore, but I do have like 2,500 hours or something crazy over the years. So, near and dear to my heart.
Nice. Okay, we'll get started. There is an agenda here. We'll go through it because I'm ready to dive in. Let's get started. So, when you first came across this, what did you think? What did you think of the offerings, and what were they saying they were offering?
This was an embarrassing situation for me because I've been at industry events like the Game Developers Conference earlier this year, Video Game Bar Association events, saying that this type of computer vision pipeline was like really far off. And I was super wrong. I had industry contacts say to me, hey, you should look at this. It seems like it's doing what it claims, providing, real-time screen reading to cheat with. Did not believe that. I thought there was probably some shenanigans going on under the hood, and I was wrong. So that's what drew me here. It wasn't just isolated. I had multiple contacts bring this up to me as something worth looking at. One thing I do want to do before we get in deeper, and I'm sorry I didn't put this on the agenda, is because this is security webcast. We're normally talking about like malware and industry stuff, like why this is relevant and important to a security professional. Because I think there's an open question that always pops up with this of like, okay, it's a video game cheat. Like, what's the big deal here? Like, why should anybody care unless you work for a video game company? So just like a couple of basic facts here. Over 2/3 of Americans report playing a game once a week. The video game industry itself is like over $220 billion of revenue per year, which is more than movies, music, and every North American professional sport combined. That's the NFL, NBA, MLB, all of them. It is the single most profitable entertainment industry in America by leaps and bounds. So we're not just looking at like some niche hobby here. We're looking at, frankly, like a massive contributor to the U.S. economy, jobs, everything. So right off the bat, we have that. And then in parallel, we have the cheat industry, which is estimated, obviously getting, firm revenue figures for that is really difficult, but it's estimated to be about 8.5 billion with a B dollars a year as kind of like a gray market shadow industry. And where the threat to your average consumer comes in, and potentially enterprise, depending on your infrastructure setup, is that these things are generally cancerous to your computer. We'll get into how Game ML, Destiny ML is a little bit different in that regard, but most of these, bear every trait of malware. They beacon to C2s. They try to do, discovery. I've seen instances in the past where video game cheats, in an attempt to beat reverse engineering and defenders, was reading every single browser tab on a user's computer, including, student records and like active duty military health records. So, this is, I think, something that always sits on the side of overall security, but it's becoming much more severe, and is something that is definitely of interest, not just to game developers, game security professionals. It should be of interest to everybody. And I could go on at length about how the cheat industry is actually where the cutting edge work is happening and not necessarily in malware development. But I feel like that's a whole conversation in and of itself. But, to kind of illustrate that, we have the example in front of us.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting, and that's an interesting perspective about the size of the economy behind just games in general, and how big of a driver that is in the overall economy for the country. So no surprise that people kind of move towards that when they're looking to do, I don't know if it's straight up fraud, but something similar to it.
I would call it that.
Yeah. So just kind of diving in. So you dove into Game ML. Is Game ML the main player that you know about? Why did you choose to go for Game ML?
So at this point, it looks like Game ML is one of like a rising player, right? I think they're getting more and more attention. I think they're drawing in more users because the cheat industry and the anti-cheat industry are kind of constantly engaged in an arms race, right? The cheat industry relies on not being detected, the cheaters not getting banned for using a cheat. Anti-cheat depends on banning those users and detecting them. So they're constantly doing this cat and mouse back and forth over, detection and anti-detection. Game ML is really interesting because it completely sidesteps that. The way that the cheat works is, as far as I can tell, pretty distinct from any other cheat on the market, and really creates a difficult situation for defenders. So, Game ML as a whole is like the brand, the cheat developer. They've got 18 different products offered, mostly for first person, third person shooters. And, when I looked into them, their Discord server, they operate primarily out of a Discord server, like a lot of these cheat enterprises, has, when I looked, 12,000 members, a couple thousand active at the time of, the snapshot. So you can reasonably assume that each one has bought from Game ML at least one time, because you need an invitation code to get in there, which is a lot of money. These cheats retail for like $35 for a week, or, 70 for a month or something like that. So you're looking at pretty decent revenues over time.
Yeah. So they had a list of 18 games here. So from the advertising, and is it all sort of the same technology and they kind of apply it to all these different games?
Yeah, there's, like I said, most of them are first person, third person shooters. I believe for, Diablo 4 and Path of Exile, we're looking at a very different style of game that can still be easily automated. But what the research shows and what the reverse engineering process shows is that, like a lot of cheat operators these days, they operate under what we call the framework cheat, right? Where there's some underlying primary engine, in this case, the machine learning, object detection, that kind of stuff, with like a very thin layer over the top of it that makes it game specific. I only cracked open the Destiny cheat, but I'm fairly confident that if I cracked open the rest of them, they would be functionally identical. So, that, for the record, the whole framework idea there is operation at scale, which is reflective of an enterprise and not just one guy in a basement. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's really weird.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean it's super interesting. I want to get into the actual purchasing. So you actually went and you kind of got into this Discord, you signed up and you purchased the real thing. So
Mhm.
talk to me a little bit about that process. Like what did it cost? Did you see anything interesting in Discord when you actually got in there? How do they validate your license key and stuff like that?
Yeah, so this purchase pathway is pretty standard. It does have some really notable things. So first of all, the purchase pathway is like one of the primary indicators for geolocating the vendor. They're charging in new Taiwan dollars. The payment processors they're using are Taiwanese. So that pretty much says to us, yes, that this is an operator based out of Taiwan. Very interestingly about this is that they take credit cards at all. So the cheat industry kind of operates in this gray shadow area where what they're doing is not technically illegal, right? There
Mhm.
is no federal law, state law that says cheating in a video game is illegal. Where they skirt the boundary of that is in DMCA, not DMCA. No, it is DMCA. Issues with circumvention of technical protections, as well as creating derivative works and stuff like that that can be pursued civilly. But either way, the upshot of this regarding the payment process is that most legitimate processors, PayPal, Stripe, things like that, explicitly disallow these types of services to use them because it is a really weird part of the market where a game developer could decide, we're going to sue this cheat company and now we're subpoenaing Stripe, PayPal for all of their payment records, and quite frankly they don't want to deal with that. So it is unusual to see a cheat site retain the ability to process credit cards for a long period of time. Most of the time, they prefer to take payments in crypto. Sometimes they have like weird and wacky gift card payment methods that just boggle the mind. But in this case, there is no cryptocurrency option. You only can pay with a credit card, which is very odd, and says to me, right, that GameML views themselves maybe not necessarily as untouchable, but more legitimate than these other providers. So that
Yeah.
right there is a big point. But these are all ClearNet sites. You just go on the website, you click on the product, and you buy it.
Mhm. And so, do you know if they're using a third-party payment processor or are they?
They are using a Taiwanese-based third-party payment
Okay.
processor. I didn't dig too much into them for my own research. Right, when I do this at the behest of clients and game developers, we dig very deeply into all of that because it's very relevant in setting up a case or
Yep.
providing some sort of disruption effort against the cheat developer. Considering this was really focused on the reverse engineering, I didn't go too deep into that. The payment processor is identified in our report, but it is, as far as I can tell, a legitimate Taiwanese-based payment processor.
Okay. Okay. So you get an email or you get a Discord confirmation and then they give you a product key, a license key, something like that.
Yeah, so when
And
you complete your purchase, they take your email and they send you an email, that you can see on the right there with the join instructions for the Discord and an invitation code. That gives you access to their customer service network, which is all handled through Discord. The website itself
right.
is very thin and is really just a storefront.
Yeah.
So you go into the Discord and they have an automated ticketing system that takes in your code and then spits you back out a license.
Okay. And so when you're going to download this, I guess program, where is it actually getting downloaded from? Is it the website? Is it Discord?
They were hosting it on their own infrastructure, but they provide you the download link through Discord.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. Was it bundled? I'm just curious from like a software perspective. Was it like what was the file format? Do you know if it was like signed or anything?
I think it's self-signed. No,
Okay.
it's unsigned. It is an unsigned executable. It comes, it's Windows only, so it comes as a
Yeah.
.exe. And while the file, this is actually getting into some interesting stuff. So the file that I downloaded is like destinyml.exe or something like that, right? But when you install it, that changes. It turns into this long, like randomly generated hex string, right? 32 characters, and our report has the exact format that it uses so that you can create detection rules for it. But yeah, it renames itself in installation as an obfuscation layer, right? Like setting up a detection for find Destiny ML running process for kernel level anti-cheat that's really common these days is trivial. But when the anti-cheat just sees this big, long, random string, right, it's got no idea and just moves on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super interesting. Super interesting. We'll get a little bit more into like the details of that in a bit, but just high level here. So I know they advertise it a bit in the way they talk about the product, about how it works and how it uses machine learning and stuff like that. But like high level, what is it doing? What does it say it's doing in terms of using machine learning to perform those traditional type of cheat attacks that you would want to perform, but you doing it in a different way?
Yeah. So just kind of lay the foundation a little bit. What I would consider traditional cheat features, for lack of a better term, kind of fit into three categories. There's aimbotting, which is what GameML focuses on and is exactly what it sounds like. It takes over your mouse through, Windows built APIs and things like that, and provides coordinates for where you need to shoot. So it completely removes the human from the equation. You could use an aimbot not even touching your mouse. So there's that. There's what we call like wall hacks or ESP hacks, which are the things that allow you to, see players on the other side of the map or through walls. They give you exact enemy positions. Really standard feature for most of these. And then finally, we have like what's called player state manipulation, right? So that would be infinite ammunition, infinite health, automatic respawns, things that affect how you are in the game. So all of that to say, GameML completely forgoes two of those categories. They don't provide any player state manipulation. They don't provide any kind of wall hack or ESP. They only provide the aimbotting service. And that right there was a key indicator of, their claims. Aimbotting with pixel recognition makes a lot of sense, but you can't provide the other two feature sets without direct memory access, which is what kernel level anti-cheat looks for. So GameML basically advertises these products as undetectable, and safe for a variety of things. They even call them what the very common term, stream safe. So hypothetically, a streamer could use a GameML product and not be detected as cheating. And when you get into like the whole streaming economy, which is a different conversation, that can be really impactful. So yeah, they advertise it as exactly that, real-time machine learning that is working off of your screen, doesn't provide any indicators to the anti-cheat, and functions as a side program that just looks legitimate. And for all intents and purposes, it does. I uploaded the sample to Virus Total like every other researcher would do, and it was the first time it had been analyzed. No hits, no detections, nothing. It looked like a normal executable for like a legitimate program.
Yeah. No, I mean, one has to think like if they're going through enough sophisticated development process to implement their own machine learning model to do this type of activity, they're probably going to do, unique compilation, obfuscation per binary and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, and also how many people are actually doing research into it, like to it have been uploaded to different things before, which I know and then you can get into the conversation of whether it's even malware in the first place. But I mean, it depends. It depends your views on that. But anyways, I do want to know what is Onx, and am I saying that correctly?
I think it's Onyx,
On
ONNX, like the
Onnex.
Pokemons.
Okay.
Onyx is, a machine learning service. So they provide models that you can train, and that is kind of what we're looking at here for GameML. Is they have 3 separate model categories that they have trained over time. I'd have to get the exact language, but it's basically ally, enemy, and head are the 3 different categories that the models are looking for. They've got multiple tiers that use a different amount of resources on the cheater's computer, provide better fidelity, are a little bit faster. And these are the kinds of things that point to a mature organization. This isn't just some one guy operation hacking away. Like, this type of refinement and process speaks to what resembles enterprise software development, which is very weird and concerning considering it's for a video game cheat.
Yeah. So is the thought that they have a custom trained machine learning model to detect, like where enemy players are or something like that based on raw inputs?
Yeah, exactly. Based on the visible stuff on the user screen. So, like a direct memory access, something that is reading the Destiny 2 process out of memory, aimbot can provide functionality like immediately snapping you around 180 degrees because it detects another player back there, or doing all kinds of wacky shenanigans that basically turn you into a gun turret. This only operates on what is currently visible to the user, which when you get into behavioral analysis for cheat detection is kind of huge, because you can if a user is constantly flipping 180 and taking out the guy behind him right after they pop out of a wall, that's a pretty strong behavioral indicator. But for someone who is just shooting what is on their screen like a normal player would be, it becomes so much more difficult to detect if they're cheating or if they're just cracked.
Yeah, no, I would imagine, because I mean, I've seen like traditional aimbotting stuff where you can see players through walls, and you just snap to somebody that's clearly not visible and behind some wall, and you're shooting through it or something like that. But you're saying this doesn't work like that at all. It would be as soon as a player is visible on the screen, it would real time detect that and be able to snap then.
100%.
And even I saw further in the report about a humanized aiming mode where it looks more realistic or it looks less suspicious when it's snapping to
it'll like
someone.
overshoot a little bit intentionally, or like miss the first couple shots, or it will do something that is more reflective of a person.
Yeah.
Because if you just are laser hitting every headshot, right, that's sus.
Yeah. No, I mean that's super. I mean, from an outside perspective, it's cool. I think it's a pretty cool feature. It's pretty cool. Obviously, sucks to deal with cheaters in video games, but it is pretty interesting, like the features that these devs will build into their product when they're just trying to make a better product, even though the end goal is something that's very controversial.
Yeah, well, and like, let me drill into that on like, it sucks to get cheated against, right? Because it kind of going back to the foundational aspects of this, these are the kinds of things that go well beyond the individual user. Because she's kind of give a little background on how like the modern games industry, and especially like the games as a service, live service economy works. Either the game itself is free to play or is like a lower one-time cost, and the game company is making their money primarily through microtransactions, $10 for a skin or whatever. And that has been a really established model for some time. So when you talk about cheaters and the impact that they have on the ecosystem, every legitimate player they drive away is lost dollars. If a big streamer, for instance, gets cheated against constantly, they are going to badmouth that game to their audience. They are going to quit playing it. And then that is going to have a downstream effect well beyond that one interaction. So there have been instances where game companies have not been able to resolve this problem, and ultimately the game shuts down because of it. I think the Cycle is like the biggest example of that, where they just couldn't get it under control. So this isn't necessarily something that is just scoped to one person's enjoyment of the game. They really, when you're not doing anything about them, when you're not protecting your players, they kind of represent like an existential threat to your ecosystem. Every Reddit post that gets 1,000 upvotes and says like, so infested with cheaters, it's awful. That's going to be there forever.
Yeah. It's like, if you're in a bad neighborhood, you'll leave.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly
similar thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, let's move on. Let's shift to the actual, you've got the game cheat, you've loaded it up. What are we looking at here? This is a UI for the customer.
Yeah, this is what you see when you open the cheat, you put in your license key, you're validated. So this is kind of like just their home panel. It's got information about GameML. It's got like an announcements feed, social links, all the things that you would generally expect to see in like a launcher for something that was completely normal. And I think it's very indicative of, GameML presenting themselves as legitimate and normal and like everything is fine. Because this looks pretty slick. It looks like something that would, fit within an enterprise application. So it is another step towards coercing the cheater into believing that what they're doing is okay.
Yeah. There was a mention of YOLO 5, YOLO V5. What is that? Is that another model?
Yeah, that's the family of Onyx models that they're using. Okay. All of the 3 that they have set up are built on that framework.
Is that their own custom name?
No, that is the variety of model that you can use from Onyx.
Okay. Nice.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, this would be the first thing that the user sees when they open up the cheat.
Okay. So, and there's model tiers. Are these costing different amounts of money, or why is there a tier system?
Because they are, local models that are running on the user's machine. This isn't necessarily a cost question. This is a detection question. So because so much of modern detection relies on, file system interaction with the Destiny process or the game process in memory, you have to rely on other telemetry to try to detect GameML. And so one of the things that I had been saying up until this reverse engineering, right, was that the idea that you would have a PC capable of running, a modern AAA game, which can be hugely resource intensive, as well as, a model capable of doing real-time detection, I felt that was a little bit beyond the pale. And so what GameML has here, these 3 different tiers, are their answer to that, right? So, and this is where, the YOLO 5 Onyx models come in. So basically what these do is they provide different levels of fidelity and functionality to the user. Light is going to provide, only limited success, but at the same time, it's going to use significantly fewer resources than like the higher tier models. Like especially the high precision one, as far as I can tell, without executing the cheat against live gameplay, is much more resource intensive, but also much faster and has a lot higher fidelity. So basically what they're offering with these tiers is, do you want to be able to just slip through undetected, or are you prepared to go what we call full rage mode, and just go hog wild for a while?
Yeah.
Um, I think there is a lot to be said for detection on, GPU loads and, what would be considered like standard usage, but it's hard to say without either, executing against a live game process, which I am not going to do without permission, or using internal telemetry from the defensive side, which obviously we don't have.
Yeah. So when you're running the cheat models, it's running locally on your computer.
Correct.
And so is it taking advantage of the GPU, or is it?
Yeah. No,
Okay.
it definitely, I mean, it needs to be able to do this. The processing power that's like required here, for any local model is coming from the GPU itself for the most part. So it is competing with the game process there for resources.
And so, do you know, is the model pulled down locally?
It's included in the executable. So as far as I could tell through the installation process, it's when you download the executable, you are downloading whatever the most recent update or patch is. And continuing to keep that system updated, you're going to need to download again. As far as I can tell, there is not an update pathway. The only network communication that I saw out of GameML in the reverse engineering process was out to their license key validation service, and some attempted calls to Patreon, which is interesting. Those Patreon pathways feel like a relic of previous infrastructure, because when I went to go check out the Patreon campaign, it had been shut down for terms of service. So presumably, right, that is just a defunct relic pathway.
Yeah.
But aside, those are the only two network calls that it really makes. So everything else is running locally.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm wondering, my head's going, are they exposing their model to theft? Or is it, because even if you have a valid license key, it's like, and it's somehow like encrypted in there, and then it gets decrypted. It's like, well, if someone was smart enough, they could pull out that proprietary model and potentially use it. But
well, I mean, that's pretty much exactly what happened when we get into the agentic process, right? Like they tried to pack it in a way, and we'll get into it, but they tried to pack it in a way that this would all be obfuscated. But at the end of the day, it was all possible to pull out.
Yeah, and it has to run somehow, unless you're guarding it behind network. But
exactly.
We can get into the agentic reverse engineering process. So you could just tell the audience what was your thought process when you started doing it? How did you kind of set up a lab, and how long did it take?
Well, let me ask you a question first, as our resident reverse engineering expert. How long would you say it normally takes you to like reverse engineer a malware sample or something?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the type of sample. So if we're talking like an actual binary, not like a .NET assembly or something like that, but like a compiled binary, it could take anywhere from like a day to like weeks, because you have to work through different code paths to figure out what it's actually doing and work through that disassembly. If you're doing it all like manually. So
yeah. So the agentic process here got it done in a day and a half, maybe, for like the full reversing. So kind of getting more into the setup, I would love to sit here and be like, this is a novel technique that I developed, but it's not. I have seen, other people using this in the same capacity, kind of empowering the reverse engineering effort through agentic AI. So considering this is an AI cheat, this felt like a really good opportunity to test it out and fight some fire with fire. So basically the kind of environment setup itself is pretty simple. I do all of my investigative work in Linux-based VMs, so that's the foundation. We stood up Cursor in the environment. I'm not going to sit here and be like, let me explain what Cursor is, because this is a technical technical webcast. So basically, I chose Cursor specifically because it's generally a coding agent, right? Like, it is capable of building its own tools at a high level, and is pretty much loaded with the functionality that I need. So Cursor is the starting point. From there, I started feeding it access to other reverse engineering tools. Probably the most notable one is Ghidra. It's the NSA reverse engineering suite that's freely available off of GitHub. So basically, just slap that inside the project directories. Wrote up a very long set of prompts on what the agent was going to do and how it was going to do it, when it needed to stop and provide checkpoints. But the general upshot here was that rather than exactly like you said, like digging through assembly or trying to, go and unpack everything, was to basically point the agent at it, and let it drive the process as much as possible. So that's what we did. For the static analysis, it all happens inside that Linux-based VM, just ripping things apart, walking back through catalogs, using any tool that it needed. There were, sitting here watching it, like I'm interacting with the Ghidra UI when it needs it, providing input, providing analysis, and redirecting it where possible. So the static analysis did not take long at all. To get a dynamic analysis of actually executing the thing, even if we're not running it against the game process, basically I set up a three machine lab environment, the foundation being the Linux box running the reverse engineering agent, and then to the side, a Windows-based sandbox in the cloud, obviously snapshotted and stuff so that we can repeat results and get consistent data from it. And that is where the cheat itself is running. To capture network traffic, there is a much smaller box that was acting as a man-in-the-middle proxy, getting everything on the network from the Windows VM running the cheat back to the reverse engineering agent, which is where we see a lot of the network pathways and the other communications that it's doing.
Nice. So did you have stuff collecting telemetry on the Windows machine?
Yep. The Windows machine, is set up with its own set of tools. We got procmon, sysinternals, like all the various different things to watch what's going on in the file system. So all of those capture artifacts are collected and sent back to the agent. Because like at every step of this process, it's telling the agent like, okay, you've gotten more information, update your assumptions, update your assessments. How can you work these findings into additional efforts for the reverse engineering process, right? So all of that comes together into like the final holistic view of the reverse engineering.
Yeah. And so did you say that the whole process was a day and a half, including the dynamic analysis?
Mm-hmm. I'm not including the amount of time it took me to create the dynamic analysis environment.
Well, let's include that. How long did it take you?
Probably 3 days.
Yeah, not bad though. Not bad at all.
No. And this is a repeatable process, right? Like at any time I can spin this infrastructure back up and it's probably going to take way less.
Yeah. No, I mean it's super impressive, like how much these LLM agents are lending themselves to stuff like reverse engineering for people who aren't like traditionally day in and day out trained in reverse engineering, to be able to spin up a lab and like break something apart this complex and get legitimate findings and be able to verify those to what the binary is actually doing is pretty awesome and maybe a little bit scary. I don't know.
No, it's super terrifying. You're dead on that one.
Yeah. It's just, and I was thinking about this when you were talking about the AI versus AI type of scenario. It is important to make the distinction between the machine learning model that the cheat uses versus these large language models, and how they're inherently pretty different. Whereas the LLMs are predicting next token, and the machine learning models are doing something that's much different. And I'm not going to pretend to understand completely. So, but yeah, I just thought about that as well, but all in the same realm of neural nets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and you know, to be clear, I have no indication that GameML is using LLMs or, you know, other AI coding agents to produce anything without seeing, you know, the completely plain text code of the thing. I think it would be hard to tell that at all. But the important note that I have there is that the research shows that GameML has been operating since 2022, which is definitely, you know, before I would say like the primary consumer advent of AI usage. So at some point, these are all created by hand. And I can only imagine that that process continues, right? And again, it remains very interesting because other cheats, direct memory cheats, rely on some level of reverse engineering of the game process itself to figure out where they need to hook in. This doesn't. This is literally just building a capture front end, right, to grab what is on your screen.
Yeah. No, I mean, well, we'll talk about the what companies can do in a second, but I just wanted to ask, so after this RE process, what were the main findings and takeaways? Was this the point at which you realized that it's actually kind of doing what it says it was going to do in terms of machine learning? And was anything like super surprising or stand out during that?
So yeah, it was after the first round of static analysis, which took a good amount of time for Cursor to do. Because I had specifically told it, you know, I want you to unpack all this. I want you to try to get me function names, try to get me any specific IOCs and information you can out of this. And when it was done, that's when it spit back the information about the Onyx models, which is kind of my like, oh damn moment of like, I have to eat crow when I talk about this because that's absolutely what it's doing. But kind of, you know, if I had gotten to that point and I had been looking at the findings and been like, okay, no, they're full of garbage. Like they are actually using memory access and they're claiming it's machine learning. Like it becomes infinitely less interesting. But because those claims are proven to be true, that drives further analysis and, you know, more detailed unpacking, like more detailed analysis of specific sections of the code, particularly those around like mouse input and capture backends and things like that. So, you know, after that first pass, I did a few. That is where I kind of solidified all of this stuff down into this is what it claims to be, and that is kind of terrifying.
Yeah. So did it end up unpacking the model?
Yes, it was able to actually grab the decryption keys, and get like an unobfuscated look at everything.
All right, so we'll be starting our own game cheat company pretty soon here.
For any of my game associates, that is a joke. That is a joke.
No, of course not. But also, I'm sure the actual program that's like leveraging the model is doing a lot of work that outside of the model itself that would need to be created as well. I am curious. Did you were you able to determine at all like what language they might have built it with or anything like that?
I wasn't able to get a language. You know, my gut instinct says C++ or something along those lines. It's a little more lightweight and, you know, runs a little bit faster. But no, we weren't able to get like purely unobfuscated like code, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, it's super interesting to me because I would assume it's like one of those low level languages like C++, maybe Rust or something like that.
Yeah, possibly.
And if you are dealing with somebody who's creating like a pretty sophisticated program software development pipeline like
Mm-hmm.
this, you're probably in what I would think is dealing with like real deal software engineers who are working at Fortune 500 companies or, you know, the equivalent
No,
in other countries. But
I've definitely seen that before, right? I've seen people that work for legitimate enterprises get, outed as a cheat developer who they basically think like, well, this isn't illegal. This is a great side hustle for me to earn some extra money. Now, when a civil lawsuit comes knocking and they have to be, get deposed by lawyers and potentially testify, that realization of, oh no, I really screwed up here, comes out. I've seen those people lose their jobs. So yeah, it is possible that you're seeing professional software engineers doing this. But at the same time, I don't have to tell you that there's plenty of talent outside of the professional field. So this could be somebody's full-time job.
yeah, yeah, I would be curious to know what their personal OPSEC would be like when they engage in something like this, just in case, like one day if those lawsuits do come knocking,
Yeah.
if can they easily be tied back to this company, or are they kind of like hidden?
My assumption is that based on the maturity of the software, there's very likely multiple people working on it, which would imply like a GitHub or something. I've seen other cheat developers that are far less professional passing zip files back and forth to
Yeah,
do their to do their code, and I don't think that's happening here. I will say from the external look, their OPSEC is pretty strong. There's the regional indicators, but I don't think they care about that. I wasn't able to, quickly identify like any developer or, person responsible for managing the website or something like that. And, the advantage of running through a Discord server is that you can be as anonymous as you want to. Now, admittedly, Discord is going to have that information, right? So if you're doing a lawsuit and you can get discovery, that's where you start. But in terms of, actual obfuscation against like discovery and, personally protecting the developers, like that does seem really strong, which is generally true. A lot of cheat enterprises will structure it in such a way that there's basically front of house, back of house, and back of house never communicates with customers. They're the actual developers. They're the ones that are making the product, and then they'll have a couple front of house people to do support and to do like website maintenance and stuff like that, that are a little bit more visible generally. But they try to create this layer between front and back, so that even if the guys in the front get popped, the guys in the back can continue doing exactly what they're doing.
yeah. No, I mean, when you're talking about Discord having all that information, I was, and you were mentioning passing zip files. I was thinking, well, I mean, you can't subpoena a zip file, but at the end of the day, if you're communicating over a managed platform where you have a GitHub or you have some sort of assets in AWS, at the end of the day, all of that stuff can be pulled in for evidence from the third party. So yeah, I mean, I guess there's no really telling the length of the infrastructure behind it without doing a specific dive into that. And
Yeah.
I don't know if the because it's not seen as black and white criminal behavior, I don't know if those investigations will happen.
Well,
But
interesting note on that point, and I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to get too deep into the legals of it, and I am going to self-promote myself for a second, right? I mentioned earlier that I was an expert witness for Bungie in the case against Aim Junkies. It's listed as Bungie Incorporated for Phoenix Digital in the documentation, but that case really is kind of a landmark because it's the first cheating case that went to a full jury trial, for better or for worse. And there has been a precedent established by that, and I think a lawyer would be able to speak to this much more effectively than I can. That case established precedent that you can sue for this stuff pretty successfully, and not just for like some arbitrary damages, but there are calculations that you can make based off of revenue estimates for the cheat site itself, as well as like player retention metrics from the game company, to say we have lost an estimated X amount of dollars as a result of this cheat. And like, not only that, reputational harm, and there's a million other things that you can stack up onto there. But the AimJunkies case really laid the groundwork for that. What is disappointing to me personally is that I haven't seen anybody pursue that since. And that bothers me. The pathway is there. You've got me started on this rant. I'm so sorry.
No.
The thing that I see from the outside is, and this is what I loved about working with Bungie back in the day. You're probably not going to make money off of a cheat lawsuit. Cheat developers aren't like managing their finances well. They aren't, putting stuff away with the idea of growth. So you're quite, and there's going to be, Bitcoin that you don't know about. There's all kinds of financial parts here, but these kinds of lawsuits should not be about making money. They are about sending a message. There was demonstrable evidence that after Bungie developed a reputation for litigating against cheat companies, because they filed a bunch of lawsuits, they had an overall reduction, not only in cheats being offered for their game, but in-game player reports. Their player retention went up. And, for anybody that exists in the video game community, that gamers can be the most fickle and complaint-heavy group of people on the planet. I am one of those people, to be clear. And I have never in my life seen such a universally positive reaction from the gaming community as you see for cheat actions, because the only person that complains is the cheater. You're outing yourself if you complain. But those sorts of efforts build this massive amount of trust, and they let the player know that you're trying to protect them and that you have their interests at heart, and then they are more likely to give you money in microtransactions. So it's hard to see the disconnect between the tools are there for you to do this and what they're for. So this is my general rant about the state of this ecosystem.
No, I mean, it's super interesting stuff, and it's good to get your perspective on that, especially the legal stuff, because you don't see a lot of that from it's all kind of like civil, at least for now, right?
Exactly.
Until they can make a case against it. But reeling it back in a little bit to the reverse engineering stuff, just to close out this before we talk about the company side of it, do you know like how many tokens you went through in this process? What can people expect?
I'll tell you, I don't know exactly how many tokens, but I absolutely blew out my cursor usage for the month on this. Everything, and it was a shame because I use cursor for other things, and this was like the middle of the month. So for maybe about 2 or 3 weeks, all of my responses were super slow.
Yeah,
it was a lot.
In the millions,
it was a lot of
tens of millions, probably.
Yeah, but I'll tell you that our leadership took a look at my token usage, and was thankfully there were upper limits on it because it was a lot.
They were like, you better get something good out of this.
They're like, hey, Steve, you need to cool it.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the trade-off nowadays with the with these companies, with the AI companies, because like, yes, you can get amazing automation and performance, but you might burn through hundreds of dollars depending on what your subscription, what model you're using. You might not be able to use it for many weeks after that, but nonetheless, let's close it out. I think this is our last slide, just touching on what can game companies actually do about these more sophisticated machine learning based cheats that don't rely on traditional memory analysis. Can they do anything? And we already touched on this a little bit, but like, is there any implications beyond just game cheating?
Yeah. So let me answer that last one first, just because it's kind of a two-edged sword. So like the first thing is a lot of like the direct problem of game cheating, I think, is exclusive to the industry, right? Like it's really hard for me to say, a manufacturing enterprise is going to be affected by this at all. But that circles back to what we said at the beginning of this is the largest entertainment industry in the United States, and the effect that it has on the average consumer is pretty outsized. So there's definitely that component. But kind of sticking with traditional enterprise, you see that, like I touched on, and we could talk about this another time at length, these cheat developers are working on very advanced things for the most part. And it is entirely possible for those developers to cross over into traditional malware development, ransomware, all kinds of stuff. Not game ML, but other cheats could be weaponized immediately. It would take one update from the developer to turn it into a ticking time bomb for every user that has it installed. So it's one of those things that doesn't represent an immediate threat to enterprise, but it does represent, kind of the trends of malware development and other traditional forms of cybercrime that would affect those industries. But in terms of like what the gaming companies can do, because there's not that process interaction that kernel level anti-cheat would find, while the cheat is in operation, you'd be relying on behavioral signals. There is like a validation heartbeat from the cheat that operates to make sure that the user has a valid license that can be detected. But you're really looking at, resource load, in-game signals, and that kind of stuff that is really hard to build effective telemetry out of. The full report does include like some Sigma Yara rule skeletons that you can use to try to up your detections. But I will specifically call out, Riot Games' anti-cheat Vanguard, which is like an always on, as being very capable of detecting this stuff because it has a much broader set of access policies. What it really comes down to, and I think because this is so hard to detect, it goes back to the legal response. That is probably the most effective mechanism for dealing with these things, because it doesn't just, any cheat and detection is really a game of whack-a-mole. Like internal security staff in a game company are already so overwhelmed with stuff that they're really just banning cheaters. Sometimes they have the capability to do things like disendeavor, but ultimately this is the sort of thing, and I know we only have a couple minutes left, so I'm not going to get into why. This is the sort of thing that should be covered by third-party contractors, not internal security staff. So the lawsuit remains, in my view, the most effective mechanism, because it doesn't just ban an individual. It doesn't just result in like a one-time ban wave that can be waved off. It creates like a real lasting change. The developers that were sued by Bungie for selling Destiny 2 cheats don't offer the Destiny 2 cheats anymore, even if they're still in operation, which says, the industry selling their cheats is profitable enough for them to continue despite massive legal pressure.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's tough because I know like with traditional antivirus and EDR stuff, it's like very straightforward in the sense of like game of cat and mouse. They do this behavior, you detect it. But when you're talking about very little indicators of compromise or of like tampering, it's like, what is there left to detect other than, the model itself or like something like that, which you're not going to have signatures for. Which is also why I was curious about whether it has the model locally and unpacks it and stuff like that. But yeah, it's an interesting space. But we have a minute left. I'll just flip it over to if there's any questions. I think the chat is unlocked. People can post them in here, but is there anything else, Steve, wrapping up, any takeaways from this? What are you going to work on next?
I've got a couple other cheats on the docket. things that don't necessarily work like this, but are providing the same functionality. I've really excited to start looking again at direct memory access card cheats, which is like a whole other kettle of fish where there's, a second computer and there's like a specific, card that you have to plug into a PCI slot. And there's a whole lot here. So I'm going to be looking at those. I am working right now on like a quite large research paper that lays out just kind of a lot more detail about the cheat ecosystem in one place. So that should be out fairly soon. But yeah, this is, I do all my regular threat intelligence, but this is really like my side passion project because I feel like the game industry is really underserved by the cybersecurity community, despite, the crazy revenues that come out of it. So, positioning myself as the person in the space has been, something I focused on over the last 5 or 6 years. So you'll see a lot more from me on this topic.
Yeah, I'm super excited to hear your endeavors into the those direct memory access cards or whatever. Like I was gonna ask about that earlier, but I figured I didn't know what I was talking about. But
it's wacky nonsense. I'll tell you that.
I remember Googling, you had told me about it one day and I was Googling and I was like, what is this? I was like, this is insane. But again, just like surprising the lengths that people go to cheat
the game,
ruin other people's days and whatnot. But I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
All right, we're a little bit over time. We didn't have any questions come in, but we can wrap it up now. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Steve, for joining. It was really good. Really enjoyed your paper. If anybody wants that, it is on our website. I think it's on our subdomain, armada.risk360.com. Right, Steve?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and you can find it there. But if not, that's all from us. Peace out.